Let me move this down. Because technically we are part 2. All right. So yesterday we talked about the general basics of interviewing, everything from the different types of interviews, a screening interview, a structured interview, an unstructured interview. We talked about the process, what typically happens, when they first call you, what's expected of you, the different questions to ask. Um, Tonight, we're going to dig into the actual interview itself. Like I said to you guys yesterday, there are, certain types of interview questions. Typically, they fall within 3 different categories: uh, general information questions, behavioral type questions, and stress related questions. The general information questions are the questions that they will ask at the top of the hour. These questions are normally positioned first or second, depending upon the interviewer. Sometimes the interviewer will start out with, oh, let me tell you a little bit about our company, and let me tell you a little bit about the position. And then they'll say, tell me about yourself. They'll ask one or several of the questions that you see listed. Either, tell me about yourself, walk me through your resume, what jobs have you held, why do you want to work for this company? They ask this question to make sure, just to get from your perspective, what your work experience has been. But in honesty, what they really want to know is really one answer to one question. Why do you want to work for our company? Even if they don't lead with that question, they lead with tell me a little bit about yourself or walk me through your resume. The follow-up question is going to be why this position, why this company? So what I always tell people, if you want to kill, 2 birds with 1 stone, then what you're going to do is just walk them through your resume and land at the interview. If your resume does not have a ton of experience for that position, which most of you won't, you are going to focus on the soft skills as you walk through your resume. Something made you want to be an electrician. So you want to start there. Find something that first sparked your desire to be an electrician, even if you have to go back to you used to love to tinker with things. Maybe you've always been curious about how things work, right? There's a truth to something steering you in this direction. And that's where you want to land, because you want to personalize it to make it believable. So if they were to ask me if I were in the electrical program, and let's just say I was the type of person that I always like to, you know, know how things work, which is kind of my personality. I would start there. I would say, well, I've always had a passion for learning how things work. I've always found myself taking things apart, putting it back together. I also really love solar energy. So I may even mention that. I was really intrigued with, energy and how we consume it. And I knew one day that I would, end up, working in this industry. When I got out of high school, I went into customer service because that's on my resume, right? If they ask for any team stuff. I did a lot of work with, customers and, some stuff, working with teams. And I even led a couple of teams, but I've always found myself, really, going back to wanting to work into the electrical industry. So after my last job doing blah, 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 I decided I was going to go back to school. While I was in school, Now you want to end up at that company. Let's say your job is to be, you want to become a master electrician and own your own business. So this position that they have, they actually, let's say, do tuition reimbursement, and maybe they work in the transportation industry that you want to work in because you're very specific about the jobs you go after. So you say, when I went back to school, I knew I wanted to work in, the transportation industry. Get straight to the point. I did a lot of research, and when I found your company, I saw that you guys did a lot of work with transportation, and you actually had multiple projects. You did aviation and you did railway. And so I thought this would be a perfect opportunity to learn about that. And I see you have a wonderful training program. And so I knew that I wanted to work somewhere like your company, because it will give me, the experience that I desire. That's all they want to know. They're really wanting to know what led you here today. Why our company? How are you going to get points? You're going to get extra points if you make your story land at this interview, right? My breadcrumbs led me to your company. All companies want to feel like their company is the company you want to work for. Why is that? Because if they hire you, they are going to be spending time, money, and energy into training you. They have to, assign people to you. There's a sunken cost that is associated with bringing on new people. Like nobody wants to onboard a new person and train them, because as they're training you, they're not making money, right? And they're pulling people away from their jobs to train you. So companies don't like to, waste that time and potential sunk cost if a person is not there for the longevity. So in their minds, they want to feel as if their company is where you want to work, is where you want to hang your hat. They know that you are bringing a service to them. So you are bringing talent, and they want you to invest in their company, your talent. But they also want to feel like you are there specifically for them. They don't want to feel like you, or I just want a job, I don't care where I work. Like put yourself in their shoes. Nobody wants to hear that. So at the end of the day, the more you can personalize it and make it about them a little bit. I've always wanted to do this. I have a passion for it. Don't say, oh, I went into, electrical because it pays money and I want money for my family. No, this is a career. It's not I want money. So don't ever use those reasons. You want to say you have a passion for the work and you're specifically at that company. So if you answer the question in that way, most times anytime I've ever answered these questions, and I always tell the story like that, they were like, oh great, okay, you've already answered 3 of my questions, we can move on. Or they'll go right into their company. They always love it. I've never had a bad response when I tell the story like that, because I'm like, let me just kill 2 birds with 1 stone. I know you just want to know why I'm here. So let me tell you a little bit about what I do. When I walk them through my resume, I always just focus on the things that I know they want to hear, those hard skills and those soft skills, and then I land on that position. Right after you do that, typically what will happen, they'll start to talk to you about the company in that position. Now they won't dig into the position too much because they'll talk about it in later questions, but they will give you a general overview. This is where your research is going to come into play. If you do your research right, inevitably you will have questions. Maybe you may have questions about, where exactly is the job site? Is there overtime? How many projects will I be working on? You're going to have questions if you do your research. You don't ever want the interviewer to know what questions are of concern to you or not, because this is a competition, right? There's some other person coming in right behind you, and you don't want anything to be a detractor. You don't know these people, you don't know how they think. Even if overtime's an issue for you, maybe tuition reimbursement is an issue for you, you're going to ask those questions, but you're going to ask them as part of the natural flow of the conversation. So they don't need to know anything is an issue or concern for you, right? But you're there to get your questions answered, because once you leave there, then you are going to assess how that interview went and whether you want to work there or not, and what you think that they should pay you after the fact. So at the top of the hour, maybe you have a question about overtime, or maybe you have a question about how many projects, because it was a little murky in the job posting. And when you went to their website, you couldn't really figure it out. Oh, let me tell you a little bit about the company. They start talking about the company. Make sure you nod your head. Make sure you act like you know who they're talking about when they say Mr. Smith, because he's the CEO. Don't look like a deer in headlights, like you haven't done your research. And then they say, yes, in this project, we just got this, contract. If you read about it on their website, say, yeah, I read about that on your website. It's down in Fort Myers, right? That new area down by the airport. Yeah, we're so excited about it. You're going to get brownie points, because they're going to say, okay, the person's done their research. And we're wrapping up one project now, then we're going to start on that. You had a question about those two projects. Oh, is that why you guys put in the job description that there were two projects that we were going to have? Yeah, that's why we mentioned that you'll start on that old project until the new project starts, and then you'll just be working on that one project. Boom, you got your question answered. Maybe you wanted to know, okay, am I going to be doing two different projects? Does that mean I'm going to have to work 80 hours a week? You had that question. So they answered it. They don't know if it's an issue for you or not. Maybe you wanted to work it. Great for you. If you didn't want to work it, you know what to do. Okay, now I can just put that in my memory bank for when I go back home and decide how do I like the job or not. If they have overtime, you may say, oh, okay, so will we be working simultaneously on those projects? Oh yeah, man, we put in a lot of overtime. We'll probably work about 80 hours a week for the next 3 months. Oh, okay. And then we're just going to move to that one position. Yeah, then we'll probably be working about 60 hours just on that one job. Good. You're just having a conversation. Put it in your mental notes. If you have your little notepad, write it down. Now, you may have other questions, but wait till the opportunity arises to ask them, so that when we get to the end of the interview and they say, what other questions do you have? I'll tell you the type of questions to have towards the end. But these type questions you have as the interview is going. Once they get past the generals, okay, let me tell you about our company, let me tell you about this new project, then they're going to jump into some standard type questions. They're going to jump into the next set is called the behavioral questions. These are past behavioral type questions. If you've never done the work before and you've never worked for them before, so most of these questions are going to center around your soft skills, right? They're going to be very boilerplate type questions. Typically, the entire question pool will be about 10 questions from general behavioral and stress. They're going to ask everyone the same set of questions. So, be patient with them when they say, okay, well, I got to ask you these questions. Even if in the first half, the general questions, y'all talk so much, because sometimes it can, be a little long-winded. They can anyway, when they're talking about the position, that they'll feel like, oh, okay, well, I know enough about you, but then they still have to get into these standard questions, because they have to compare apples to apples when they interview the next person. So these questions are going to be past tense questions. You'll know that they're past tense questions because it'll always start with, tell me about a time when. Tell me about a time when. Now, these sets of questions are going to fall in three scenarios: either a time with a customer, a time with a coworker, or a time with your boss. If it is a time with a customer, you already know it's going to center around making the customer happy, some type of conflict, and they want to know, how did you handle it? That's all they want to know. How did you handle it? Do you understand that when you engage with customers, that you're supposed to focus on the problem and not the person? That's a big deal, right? Focus on the problem, not the person. Why? Obviously, if a person has a problem, they're going to be passionate. They could be agitated. They could be angry. They could be confused. None of that should matter, because this is business. You need to focus on the problem. I don't care if you worked at Best Buy and somebody came in and they had a warranty, right? And maybe their warranty just expired, but you're going to try to help them and you already know it just expired, but you're going to say, "Hey, let me jump on the call with you and see if there's anything that we can do." The reason why I want you to have a notepad is because maybe you did work at Best Buy because you said, "Okay, Miss Taylor said they could ask tell me about a time when you had to deal with a difficult customer and how did you handle it." Okay, I do have a scenario where this lady named Beth came in and she had an expired warranty. What did I do to solve her problem? Well, whatever you did. So whatever your Beth story is, think about something. I'm sure if you've worked somewhere before, you've helped a customer, they just want to know, what did you do to help that customer and solve the issue? Can you solve problems is all they want to know. So your Beth story, I would just have it on my notepad, a B for Beth or just Beth. They don't need to know what your secret language is, but it's just to jog your memory, because they may not ask you about Beth. They may say instead, "Tell me about a time you will be working on a lot of different projects. And so you're going to have to work well with the team. Tell me about a time you had to work with a team member and there was some conflict." It's always going to be some conflict. 9 times out of 10, it's going to be the other peer didn't do something right. How did you handle it? What they want to know is, do you know how to help your peers? If you ever played sports before, you kind of know that energy. In the military, we used to call it no man left behind. You always go back and pick up your spare. If you've ever watched military movies, you see how we pick up the man and we carry him to safety, right? You never leave a man behind. So they want that same type of energy. They want to know that if you have a peer and there's any issue, do you know how to support your peer? They don't want to ever hear, "Oh, I went to my boss and I had to say, Tommy's not pulling his weight, blah, blah, blah." They want to hear, you went to Tommy, you offered up your service, you were able to help Tommy and get him back on track. They want to know that you know how to work on a team. That's all they want to know. So if you have a Tommy story, just have it, on a notepad, Tommy. They could ask you a customer story, Beth, Tommy. Now, the third scenario is going to be about your boss. If they ask you a boss related question, this is definitely probably going to have to do with the boss giving you too much work and you need to ask questions to the boss. We call this managing up. And basically, what it means is, bosses give conflicting, um, you know, directions all the time. It could be, "Hey, go finish this project by this Friday." But then he or she gets a fire round and now you have to pivot and go do this other project, but they forgot that the deadline for that project, like sometimes bosses do forget. Are you the type of person that can go to your boss, not only ask for clarifying questions, but cherry on top, offer up a solution? They want to know, are you solution oriented? So try to think of a time, just in case they ask you that type of scenario, they give you that scenario where you've had to go to your boss and offer up a solution for conflicting projects. We don't know exactly one of those three that they will ask, but 9 times out of 10 is going to be one of those three. And 9 times out of 10 is going to be around those general type of situations. Now, the next set of questions are going to be stress related. And we call these stress related because these are the hypothetical questions. And these are the questions that will center around the actual job that you're going to work for. They're hypothetical because they're going to say, "Okay, what would you do if?" Now, this is where you need to have done your homework, because if you read that job description very well, you know the type of work that they do, then this position, these questions are going to center around the position that you're applying for. Sometimes they even throw curveballs in there, from what the last person did or didn't do. They always try to, get a better version of whoever left, if that's the case, if someone has left. And most times, that probably has something to do with teamwork type stuff. But if They ask you these hypothetical questions. What would you do if? The good news is they typically will still center around one or three of those scenarios. Something with the customer, something with a coworker, something with your boss. The only difference is it's going to be specific to the work. So if you know you're going to be working at a company, in transportation, working on contracts, the customer is probably going to be whoever the project person is, right? Let's say you're working on, at the airport, and there's some project manager at the airport. He's the customer, so he's probably going to have some issue with something. What would you do? It doesn't even matter how you answer it, as long as you center your answer around, well, I'm going to listen to what he has to say. We got to focus on the issue. If he has something to do with saying, oh, we didn't pull the wire right, or, the CCTV wasn't hung right, whatever you're doing there, then you're gonna work with him, try to offer up some solutions and focus on the issue to get it done. That's all they want to hear. Same thing with the behavioral. Do you know how to focus on the issue? They want you to be a problem solver. They don't want you to say, oh, I don't know what to do. I'm going to tell them, talk to my lead. No, I'm going to listen to see what I can do. I'm going to let them know that we'll handle it. If I need to escalate it, I will. But, the goal is to stay on task and to stay on time, right? Time and task is real big in projects. If it is a coworker, especially if you're working on these project teams, it's going to be something very similar. What would you do if your coworker is falling behind, your coworker needs help? You already know what to say, whatever it is. If we're working on this team and we got to hang 20 TVs by the end of the week, and my coworker is, falling behind, I'm going to see what I can do to support that coworker. Maybe they're having a hard time, with the wiring. Maybe they're having a hard time, whatever they're having a hard time with. Your goal is to support them, to help you guys stay on track. Not that you're going to go do their work for them, but you're going to try to figure out what the issue is, because sometimes, your coworker could just be confused by stuff. That happens all the time. I know when I was in the Army, for example, we were in Korea, and I'll never forget because it stands out. And we had to do what's called land navigation. Y'all know what that is, right? That's where us military folks have to go in the woods and find our way. They literally throw you out in the woods and they give you a protractor and a compass, a map and some grid coordinates, and they say, okay, go find these 5-mile radius, go find these points in the wilderness and come back and tell me how you did. They do us like that, guys, and they do us like that in the daytime and the nighttime. Can you imagine? And I'll be honest, I had no idea what I was doing, and I thought I said, oh my God, I'm just gonna fail this test. They're gonna kick me out of this program. And I was distraught. And I went to a peer. I didn't even know this guy. And I was like, I have no idea what I'm doing. And this guy sat me down and he explained it to me in a way that I could understand it. And I was like, oh, okay. And I aced it, right? And all it took was just him explaining it to me, because I just wasn't understanding it, from the format that they were teaching it in. So I'll always be grateful to that person, because if it wasn't for him, I would have failed that test and I wouldn't have been able to get promoted. So sometimes it just takes, your peer just helping you out a little bit, so, everybody can stay on task. If it is a manager, same type scenario, it's going to be, they're giving you conflicting directions, and you need to ask clarifying questions and maybe even offer up a solution. So obviously you don't know exactly how they're going to frame the hypothetical questions, but you know that it's going to have something to do with the job. So the more you can learn about the job, obviously you won't be able to learn too much, but read up on stuff, right? So if read up on this company, Google it, ask, Google, the type of work that this type of company does, the type of work that, an electrician at this type of company will do, so you can get a gist of what you will be doing. Does that make sense, guys? Now, when you get to these hypothetical questions, and let's say you had a question about cross training, because that was important to you. This is a place where you can ask the question. They're saying, hey, you guys are going to be working on um, teams, because you'll be in addition to you answering these questions, obviously you guys, there'll be some other communication between the two of you. And this is where you can, that was your next question, you want, about training. And they say, okay, you're going to be working on these project teams, and there's several projects. And we have this new project coming up, and he says, you can say, oh, you guys are going to be doing the cross training there, because I read it that you guys will be doing the cross training. Oh yeah, man, we're going to give you opportunities to train, and you can even, go back to school, and we even pay for it. That's what you want to know. You got your question answered. Why is that important? Because when you get to the end of, hey, do you have any questions? If you save all those questions to the end, one is going to be awkward. Like, okay, an hour into the interview, and now you're circling back, asking questions about, if it's two projects or not, and the guy told you that at the top of the hour, it's going to look like you weren't paying attention, right? And then it also looks like it could be an issue for you. And so remember, they're on high alert. When you meet someone for the first time, all your senses are on high alert. So they could misinterpret that as that's an issue for you because you brought it up. But if you bring it up naturally in conversation, they don't know if it's an issue or not. And you don't want to give away your hand. I'm sorry, it's like playing, cards. You don't want to give away your hand, because you don't want the next guy to come in there all eager and making it seem like everything is roses and he'll do just about anything to get the job. And they took it the wrong way because you asked that question at the end, and they're thinking, oh, I don't know if Cynthia's going to want the job because she was concerned about, how many projects we had. Like, so you don't want to let on that anything is or isn't an issue. That's why you don't ask them all at the end. Couple questions they should never ask, guys, and this is just for your own knowledge. This stuff is illegal. They should never ask you about your age, disability, ethnicity, gender, marital status, or religion. I know you may say, what? Why would they do that? You'd be surprised. Sometimes you may or may not know the biggest discrimination is age. Do y'all know that? The biggest discrimination is age. You come in there, you're all gray haired, maybe got a little bit of a limp because you put your back out playing basketball. People judge. They can be like, oh, this old guy, they could, right? How old is this person, right? People can't discriminate, right? So don't go down that rabbit hole talking about any of these things on the screen. I do not care if the person just had a baby and they're all excited and, they're showing you photos of the baby. Maybe you just had a baby too. Don't offer up that information, because you don't know if that person's boss was all PO'd because the person has been on maternity leave for 12 weeks. Guys get maternity leave too. And now here you are, you just had a baby. And so the boss could be thinking, oh, now I got to worry about another baby. Here you are just trying to build rapport because, we're nervous. We're trying to build rapport. And now somebody has taken something personal about you and thinking differently about you. They'll get to know you once you get hired, right? So you want to be nice. Oh, that's a cute baby. Don't tell your business. Keep all your business to yourself. They can't ask you. I don't care if you look 6 months pregnant. They can't ask you, what do you do, right? Because that can be construed as, maybe you're being biased. That has happened. I knew of a professor actually that was applying for a job, and she had told them that she had a disability and she was a veteran, and that so she just needed accommodations with the computer screen. It wasn't anything big. And once she got on, and they agreed to it, and once she got on, and then all of a sudden they wanted to renege on it and not buy it, and then they got perturbed that I guess she was, demanding it, they let her go within like 3 weeks. And so she fought back, and she got an attorney, and she was like, hey, I quit my other job for this job. And I think she may have won that case. I'm not sure about it, but people can actually take you to court because those things are illegal even from a job interview, right? So it is pretty serious, and most people know better than to even ask you those questions. Again, I don't care if you walk in there looking 6 months pregnant, they shouldn't be asking you, when are you due? Because you may take that as, oh, you're concerned that, I'm going to have a baby and now you're going to have an issue. I don't care if you walk in there with a eye patch on your eye and they're thinking there's no way this person is going to do electrical. You don't know. I could have just got poked in the eye from my kid's pencil and I'll be fine, right? So they should know better to steer away from those questions. If you apply for the job, they looked at your resume and they thought you were qualified, they need to just ask you questions and keep their opinions to themselves, right? So anyway, you don't have to answer any of those questions anyway, but just so you know, these questions are illegal to ask. Now, what kind of questions can you ask? Clearly you want to know, like I said, maybe the working hours. Um, if I can squeeze that in to the conversation when we're talking about stress related questions is when I would ask about it. Oh, like I said before, the example, oh, we're doing 80 hours now and 60 hours then, just so you'll know whether it's an issue for you or not, you got the question answered. You can worry about that later. Um, Sometimes it's good to ask, when will the project start? Right? Because if you read that it was a new project, and they said, well, you're going to be having two projects, but maybe you're going to be doing this first project for the first 3 weeks, and then you'll be doing both of them for 2 months, and then that first project will end, and then you'll just be doing that project. It's good to know, like, what are you getting yourself into? Nobody wants to just walk into a situation blind. It's good to ask those technical questions because it makes it seem like you're fully engaged. You don't just want to be like, no, 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 just when do I start? I don't care about anything, right? That's going to look weird. So you want to make it seem like you're actually, curious about how the flow of the work will be. So these are very standard questions to ask. What should you not ask about? Obviously, you should not ask about salary unless that is something that they have told you up front because they have one flat number. The reason why you don't ask for salary is not because it is like you can't ask about it, but the protocol is this. If their salary range, let's say, is between 25 and 40, they don't know what they're going to offer you until they know what you're worth, right? So you go through the interview process, you answer all the questions. From your resume, they may have thought you were a $25 an hour person, but after you got in there and the way you answered the questions and they realized, oh, this person has a little bit more experience than I thought, they're going to go back to their huddle, and obviously they're going to try to get you for as low as possible. That's just how companies are. But they're going to say, hey, I don't know, man, because Thomas, we were talking to him, and remember he was talking about that project management experience he had. I think we may have to offer him 30. Right? We really, really like him over the other two candidates. Then they're going to tell HR, and their HR department is going to be the one that is going to offer you the job. Thomas, we're so happy to let you know that you've been selected. We would like to move forward in the process. We want to start you out at $30 an hour. You have gone home yourself and you've assessed what they've told you in the two projects and the traveling. Maybe initially you were thinking, okay, I'll accept 25, but after talking to them, you're like, nah, man, I'm gonna have to do at least 27. They just offered you 30, even better. Now, if you would have said something, you trying to negotiate before, everybody's had an opportunity to go to their huddle and talk, you may have talked yourself out of $3 talking about, well, I'll take 27, or how much are you going to offer? Like, you don't want to seem desperate in a career situation. The goal is to understand the work, go back and think about it, and then decide on what the salary should be. Now, I am not going to tell anybody when you start a job for the first time that you should be trying to negotiate salary, because it's your first time, right? Typically, is I'll accept it or I won't. But once you get into your career, you negotiate your salary. That is standard, is what people expect, especially after you've done the interview and you've determined that, oh, okay, for what they want me to do, here's what I expect to be paid. Which you can also ask, where they are in the hiring process. You need to know, am I the first person that you're interviewing? And so now I have to wait 3 weeks until you get done with the interview process? Or am I the last person that you're interviewing and I should expect to hear back from you in 2 weeks? Totally fair to ask. Any make sense, guys? Yep, yep. All right. Now, this is why we want you to practice, right? Because if you are going to be asked these series of questions in career services, I guess you guys are going to have your training. Is it tonight? I can't remember. Or is it next week? I can't remember. Whenever you do that, and they'll talk about that, and they'll talk about, for your career, for electrical, the types of questions that you should expect, right? But this is why we want you to practice, because again, none of us walk around just talking about ourselves all the time, especially trying to answer behavioral questions versus stress related questions. You can go to Google and you can Google standard interview questions for an electrical technician, and they will give you some standard questions. I'm going to tell you the truth. Sometimes companies just go Google questions and they pull them down and ask you, because a lot of companies are not HR. They don't have like fully functioning HR departments. And they'll just go pull it from the internet just so they can have some questions to ask. So there you go with that. But so you can get familiar with the type of questions that they will typically ask you, specifically in that particular industry. I would Google those questions just to help you prepare. Obviously, the night before, y'all know the drill, do what you need to do so you're ready to go. All right. So I was going to show a mock interview. It was just a little 3-minute clip, but I did put it in your classroom. I won't show that. It just talks about the do's and don'ts of, interviewing. So with that being said, here is your live conference question for tonight. Here's what I want to know. I want to know 3 things that you're looking for in a company. So if you are using your long-term goal as your true north, right? That's why that long-term goal is so important. I know I want to become a master electrician and own my own business. So I know I want to work for a contracting company in transportation. What are 3 things I want this company to have, right? That's how I would use my long-term goal to answer this question. What are 3 things I would look for in that company? Make sense? Now, let me tell you a little bit about your assignment for tonight. Your assignment for tonight is really easy because I just want to name. The assignment that you're going to do that it technically is due next week, but to this week, I just want to name. I want you to start talking to people about your long-term goal. This assignment is called a director's Q&A. I want you to find somebody, I don't care what industry that they're in. It can be a family member, it can be a coworker, it can be anybody that is in some type of leadership, right? Supervisor and above. And I want you to go tell them what your long-term goal is and get their feedback. If you want to ask them whatever you want to ask them, they don't have to work in your industry. Maybe they can just be in charge and you want to be in charge one day. Whatever question that you have that can help you with your long-term goals. Maybe you've been thinking about your long-term goals. In week 3, we're going to be setting some short-term goal steps to get to it. And maybe you just want some feedback. I even put a little Q&A questions that you could ask them. They're in the assignment. I just want to know who it is you would talk to. Even if you end up talking to somebody else, that's fine. So if you're just going to talk to your spouse, just put Lynn Taylor. I'm talking to Lynn Taylor. She works at CVS, and and that's all you really have to put. Lynn Taylor. She works at CVS. And by next Thursday, I want you to have spoken to Lynn, let her know what your long-term goals are, and get some feedback from her. All right. So for tonight, all you got to do is just give me a name and what they do. That's for the assignment. So you don't even have to do that tonight. You got to do it by Sunday, right? Make sense? All right, guys, listen, tomorrow is midterm. So that means that technically we won't have class. So anytime you have a test, the teacher's not going to give you a lecture and then you take a test. We will come on, but we're only going to come on for the first 5 minutes because, you guys are so small. We probably won't even be here that long. I'm only going to come on. I'm going to talk to you about a couple of things, and I'm going to give you your conference question, and then I am going to release you to start your midterm should you want to start it. Now, obviously you still have until Sunday at midnight to get it done, but technically tomorrow is your midterm day. So after the first 5 minutes or so, you get your live conference question, I'm going to release you to do your midterm. So if you come on and we're not here, it's just because I've already let you go. You can just go to the video and grab the question if you didn't see it. All right. Well, all right, my friends. Adios. Hasta luego. I'll talk to you tomorrow. Okay, bye-bye.